When I made it to my home place, I found triumph of the will. Where once lay a shining city, stood a fortress on a hill.
This is Fortress on a Hill with Henry, Danny, Kagan, Jovanni, Shiloh, and Manisha.
Good day, everyone. We're revisiting the film This Is Not a War Story, which tracks a ragtag group of combat veterans in New York whose anti-war art, poetry, and papermaking keep them together. Despite the specter of the French suicide and the ever-crystallizing fact that healing from war is sometimes an impossible mission, the film focuses on moral injury and follows Isabel, a young Marine combat vet fresh from deployment for one of America's forever wars in the Middle East, struggling to readjust to life back home, where she finds a community of veterans with the same struggles. Isabel's story and that of the veterans in the film is just one of many stories of combat veterans returning home from America's imperialist wars abroad, where they are left to struggle with their own demons on their own. At the beginning last year, we did an interview about this film. And just to recap, we're going to present a trailer.
Told them their story. They just didn't get it. Coming out from a war, feel morally justified being a part of. It's not easy to live with. They don't even know that we've watched. Yeah. Thank you for your service. If a kid wants to die, he's going to find him. Are you thanking me for blowing up the school or for blowing up the hospital? Thanking me for slaughtering a family in Mountain Dew. Thank you for MST, for burn pits. I know you're not thanking me for being a hero. I was a pawn.
Show me how to fucking live.
Nothing about this is easy, okay? Think you could tell me your story?
This film, This Is Not a War Story. They did several screenings across the country, won several awards, and screening, including, and is now streaming in HBO, on HBO. So joining us is, I have three veterans here that are starting the film. One is Jen Berry. He is a poet and author whose books include Earth Songs, Life and War After War, and other poems, and co-editor Winning Hearts and Minds. After war poems, Winning Hearts and Minds, war poems by Vietnam veterans. A U.S. Army veteran of Vietnam, he coordinates war writers' workshop and programs for veterans and family members in northern New Jersey. He's presented poetry readings at the Garland R. Dutch Poetry Festival, New York City Poetry Festival, Puffin Cultural Forum, and other venues. His artwork has appeared in the Brennan Country Courthouse Gallery and Jersey City grounds for Sculpture Art Gallery and other galleries from Washington, D.C. to Reno, Nevada. For more information on Jen, go to www.jenberry.net. We also have with us Kevin Basl. Kevin is a writer and musician living near Ithaca, New York. He was in the U.S. Army from 2003 to 2008. Twice deployed to Iraq since 2013. He has facilitated numerous hand papermaking workshops with Frontline Arts. He has also taught many writing workshops for veterans with war writers. He is a member of About Face, formerly Iraq Veterans Against the War, and Veteran for Peace. To read his writing and hear his music, visit www.kevinbasl, that is BASL.com. And we also have Talia Lugacy, who co-wrote and directed the feature film Descent, starring Rosario Dawson, which premiered in competition at the Tribeca Film Festival and was released theatrically by Warner Independent. Despite an NC-17 rating, Descent was championed by the New York Times as an essential to see vividness, a vividness never seen in American film. Talia is a full-time assistant professor at screen studies at Eugene Lang College of Liberal Arts, the New School in New York City. She is also a member of Actors Studio Playwrights and Directors Unit and began studying filmmaking at the NYU TISC at the age of 15. She has directed numerous short films, environmentals, PSAs, and Frack Action, Water Defense, Mark Ruffalo, and Food and Water Watch. Thank you guys for joining us. How you guys feeling?
Very well, thanks.
So talk about the film. It's been over a year now that you released this film. You guys did several film screening across the country. I believe you guys did a few film screening in Colorado, in California, New York. We did one here in Texas, San Antonio. Talk about that experience, because you, in those film screening, you actually talk to the audience as well, right?
I can answer that. Unfortunately, we didn't have as much interaction with audiences as we would have liked, because the film was circulating film festivals at the height of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So a lot of these festivals were online, and we did have really healthy conversations that way. But it wasn't until towards the end of 2021 that we were able to screen in person. Yeah.
How was that?
It was, you mentioned the screening in San Antonio, and actually
Yes.
you all were in person, and I believe myself and another veteran, Eli Wright, joined that remotely. But that was one of the best ones in terms of getting a chance to talk to the audience afterwards. I remember a female veteran standing up full of absolutely racked with emotion and saying, thank you for making a film that spoke my soul. And that's, for God's sake, that stays with me all the time. I mean, that's why you make the film. Yeah. Being in person with it is essential. I mean, I wish we could have done it more,
And both Kevin and Jen, right, both were in the film. And what's interesting about this film is that you have the combat veterans, right? And you have combat veterans from past wars and current wars. They were generational, and their stories were similar, right? So I wanted to go to Kevin and Jen to, what was your experience in doing this film and pretty much expressing your experience in actual in camera, and how does that feel? How was that experience?
Well, what you see in the film is an accurate representation of what a workshop looks like. And yeah, like I guess the process of acting and preparing to be into the film, I get pretty bad stage fright. So I think like one of the ways that I feel, or that I dealt with it for the film, was to sort of present myself as a character, right? I was myself, but I was very much like a version of myself I wanted to be. And that was really empowering in a way. So I appreciated that about the experience.
How about you, Jen?
Yeah, I was really worried that I'd have to remember what's in a script, because I can't remember things very well any longer. I survived a stroke, but Talia said, just be yourself, which was the hardest thing of all. You become self-conscious. Wait a minute. But when we got into, cutting pieces of uniform and interacting with the discussion that goes on when you do that, and then somebody's working on some artwork and says, come over here and help me with that, then you forget there's a camera zooming around the room.
that camera just becomes like a fly on the wall, and you guys just be pretty much just behaving normally, right?
Yes. And
Because
then,
go ahead.
well, because she had us do like sometimes 10 takes.
Oh,
By
really?
take 5, I realized what pauses are for. I'm not rushing through a script. I'm not rushing through life. Slow it down to the actual thing that we do when we're doing workshops, which is not even thinking about something, and then something reminds you of something, and you say, oh, this reminds me of so whatever. It reminds me of, which was the whole point.
Precise.
Yeah, I thought doing the multiple takes was actually pretty fun. Just over and over, trying to get it right, but improvising at the same time. It was a really fun process.
Yeah, I was, and one of the things that took, well, I've been to one of those paper making workshops. I went through it here in I believe it was in Dallas or Austin, right there. We had another vet, right? He was also part of the paper making project, and he had a workshop for us and showed us how to do everything, and pretty much went through the process. It was pretty cool. That was my first time ever doing it. I really liked it. But when I was listening also to your interactions as you guys were doing, it didn't look robotic. It looks like, you guys was just, it was natural. It was like, it's veterans will do stuff, like we're in a motor pool or something. We're just, shooting we call shooting the crap, just talking, just telling stories and just randomly, changing topics left and right. And just, as we're changing a wheel or something like that in a motor pool, as we're doing a task, just how the conversation just kept flowing and just different things that you guys keep, drawing back from experiences and throwing there and just joking around, and which was I could really relate to those scenes there because I remember doing it myself, being like I said, doing some type of manual task, or just shooting the crap, you guys feel the same way as I don't know what was your background in the military, but was you guys feel the same way as it was happening like that?
Yeah, I think that that aspect of the military, having some downtime and really having nothing to do, so make conversation, smoking and joking. That is really a major aspect of the workshop. It's like you have busy hands. You're making paper, you're cutting up the uniform, and maybe in those times in the military when you're in the motor pool, you're trying to keep busy, making conversation. So yeah, that's absolutely a component of these workshops and what we do.
So Talia, was that intentional, or it just happened that way and you just captured it in the film?
Oh, that was very intentional. It was one of the first things that I was struck by when I came across these guys in this process. Acting is behavior ultimately, and so what I was seeing in these workshops was so much physical behavior, and so I sort of knew that as long as we were physically occupied, and that this was focused, the dialogue and the conversation would flow, and if we had a direction we wanted to go and things we wanted to bring up or incorporate into the film, we could do so pretty seamlessly if we kind of choreographed it with physical behavior. So that's how I concentrated on it. And I spent an awful lot of time learning the process and trying to understand how those different phases of the work connect and what various people do at different times, and how conversations would naturally arise. I did an awful lot of observing as well as immersing myself in it. And, ultimately, yeah, it's what you would call structured improvisation. It's not completely off the cuff. It is, but it's grounded in these physical behaviors, and that's what allows people to, as Jan was describing, become basically unself-conscious over it's a little awkward at first, but you forget the camera's there, and the reason for that is because you are physically engaged and occupied, doing things that they're very comfortable doing, and they do all the time, and that allows us to kind of engage with that world in a natural way.
Also in the film, I believe everyone there was a veteran. Was that, veteran, but you, the main the other main, your co-actor, and Danny, right?
That's right. So the actor who played Will, Sam Adegoke, not a veteran, and also the actor who played Timothy, Danny Ramirez, also an actor and not a veteran.
Veteran. So, but everyone else was a veteran, and what you did is you intentionally created an atmosphere you intentionally made it like intergenerational.
Yes.
Right? Intergenerational. And I think that was, that was one of the beauty of the film, because one of the things that, so I was in the military I came in the military before the so-called Global War, and then left and got out like around 2007. Right. But one of the things that was talked about among my peers is there was this comparison, this aura, when they were building up to go to, to deployment and train for deployment and everything. There was this aura, there was this feeling that we were trying to go, we were trying to be like that, the greatest generation, for example. We're trying to go back to World War II. And if you look at the uniforms today, the military, right, the Class A's, I don't know if you noticed that, Kevin, that they changed the Class A's to a World War II Class A's. I don't know if you've seen that. So it's like bringing back this aesthetic, going back, to the Second World War, because it's very it's very romanticized. Yeah, very nostalgia, romanticized, right? But they skipped a couple other wars in between. And one of the wars that they skipped was Jan's War, so that doesn't really come into the conversation, so it seems like back then, I'm here thinking it was World War II and now us, and now with the next greatest generation, right? That's the way it was presented to us, right? But like I said, they skipped the whole other host of wars, which the United States have been continued, whether they've been open war or dirty wars. And what Talia did in this film was just put into this intergenerational war. If I'm not mistaken, you had combat vets from the Korean War as well. You have Vietnam and what was that? Am I mistaken?
Korean, I don't believe so, but we had several veterans from who served in Vietnam, and a veteran who served in Somalia.
Yeah.
Well, the upstate scenes were shot at a World War II veteran's house.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. We couldn't have made the film without Gould Coleman, World War II veteran. And his house is the location for the whole second half of the film. And I would pay him a visit almost once a month for a year or more, just to hang out and prepare the film. And we would talk at length about what the film was about and how we were going about it.
So what was beautiful is that the narrative that you put here together, right? You put all these intergenerational wars together, right? And you title the film, this is not a war story, right? Meaning that this is not all this glory and, just, charging the hill and everything and all this, sexualizing that, you made it different, right? You made it different than the other ones. John, I'm trying, what's your thought on all this and bringing together all these combat vets from different generations and you're sharing space with them?
Oh, I was excited about this film when I first heard from Telly what she was thinking about doing, and then to see it develop into interacting with people who I had been interacting with, not only in doing paperwork, but we did poetry performances. I primarily helped with doing writing workshops and then putting on performances. And so to some degree, that provided us some background to this is another kind of massive public performance.
I think, our generation of veterans, post 9/11 veterans, have learned a lot from, the generations before us. And unfortunately, a lot of opportunities have been denied to veterans pre 9/11. a lot of organizations are only for post 9/11 veterans. But one nice thing about both the writing workshop, Warrior Writers, paper making workshops, Frontline Arts, is that they were always open for all generations. And that's, it creates like a sort of mentoring relationship, which is, super important. I've learned so much from Vietnam veterans. Jan actually was the person who taught me how to make paper. I don't know if he remembers that day. Jan was actually the first person to stand with me at a vat of paper, and and we pulled sheets together, and I was hooked. And yeah, in the film, it's like all the workshop scenes represent that so well. The conversations between Vietnam veterans and post 11 veterans, it's represented really well. And those conversations are always interesting, unique. Every workshop has different topics come up. People reminisce about what they did doing anti-war activism, and where they served in the military. And then it's like even things like VA services, all sorts of great things like that come up in conversation.
Yeah, they see the synergy here in the film, and that was, for me, that was one of the best parts of the film. The synergy there with the veterans doing the paper making and the conversation, and I think one of them saying, and they're relating back to the experience in Iraq and the resistance they found in Iraq, and they were saying something that if the roles were reversed. That's one of the things that I remember the most, that stuck with me. The roles were reversed, it'll be Red Dawn all over the place, something like that, right?
That was Nathan Lewis.
Huh? Was that?
Nathan Lewis said that.
Yeah. The roles will be reversed. It'll be Red Dawn. It'll be Red Dawn every day, something like that. There, which I love that saying, because it's true. Because people don't think about it. When one of the things that I found nauseating, in the run up to the war in Iraq, is all the rah or support the soldier and everything like that, and it seemed like we're cheering a team to a Super Bowl. We just made we're going to the Super Bowl. That's what it felt like. The whole nation was like that. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I took from the conversation. Jed, so you're a Vietnam vet, right? Can you compare the atmosphere of your generation with this Gulf War, or this Middle East wars, and the atmosphere that's happening here back then? Could you compare those two generations there?
There were basically two portions of the Vietnam War. I was there in 1962 and 1963 when the government didn't want to say we were in the war and called us advisors. Until fairly recently, the VA insisted that I wasn't a Vietnam vet because the Vietnam War started in August 1964 with the Tonkin Gulf, which by that time, hundreds of GIs had already died in Vietnam. But the VA insisted that I didn't fit that category. So that then after the Tonkin Gulf, everything after that point was rah, 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 rah. And it was talking about the big battalions are coming in. And I ended up at West Point as a cadet after I was in Vietnam. And I heard all this baloney and decided I didn't want to have a career making things up. And going back to Vietnam in charge of the platoon, in which when I was there, I was with World War II and Korea War veterans who said this whole thing is bizarre. But the government didn't want to hear the reality of it. And so the Hollywoodization of the Vietnam War kicked in basically in 1965 when a big unit of the Marines was sent in. There had already been small units of Marines there. And then the big Army units show up. The smaller units had already been there all of that got shoved aside. And so many of us who were in Vietnam knew that the next generation of veterans was going to be mistreated. And in fact, when the war started in Iraq, I was part of helping to organize a protest against the war, in which we were trying to have the protest just before the war started. And we had chosen up in March. The war started that Thursday. So when a bunch of us went down there, there were about 500 vets to protest the beginning of the war. Everybody thought we were crazy, but I was saying to people around me, a year from now, a bunch of angry guys are going to come back from Iraq. Let's be prepared to help them. And the larger organization called Vietnam Veterans of America has a slogan, leave no veteran behind, because many of us were dismissed by World War II vets, such as in the American Legion. Like, who are you guys? You were not in a real war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to a large degree, Vietnam vets tried to be of assistance to Iraq veterans against the war, or just individually assisting people as they got out of the military or while they were still on active duty. One of the other interactions was through an organization called Military Families Speak Out, in which we were trying to assist people on active duty through their families in many cases. Then sometimes we were able to assist people in making that transition of getting out of the military, but not always. Some people committed suicide. And we were still trying to figure out to this day, what is it we can do to try to help somebody get through that period of time in which, because they don't say anything, you don't know they're going to kill themselves. Most people don't announce it. And in some cases, I'm talking about Walt Nygaard, who's in the film. His son was in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then back in Iraq. While we're doing what we're doing, we're trying to be of assistance to, holy moly, a family's got to deal with this is what they would choose, but their son is gone with the National Guard gone here, with the Army gone there, with another National Guard unit gone there. And we didn't have that in the Vietnam War, of the National Guard being dragged off overseas. In that time frame, getting to the National Guard was a guarantee you would not go to Vietnam. And what the military has done in this time frame is decide there's a group of people we can capture. You're in the National Guard. Hey, they signed up for it. We'll send them overseas. So one of the things that I learned, I didn't know this, is I heard people coming back and speaking at Iraq veterans against the war. Nobody in the National Guard is trained to do what they were told to do, to set up roadblocks and determine who doesn't understand it. You just told them to stop in English. They don't speak English. They didn't stop. So your sergeant or somebody says, shoot up the car. Over and over and over and over and over again, heard these kinds of stories. What does somebody do with that kind of an experience if you don't have somebody either writing about it or putting it to artwork or speaking about it in some fashion?
Yeah, you turn it against yourself if you don't have.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think one of the difference, what you just mentioned there, Jen, is that I recall that in the lead up to the Iraq War, because so you got to keep in mind that a few months earlier, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan, and they had a lot of popular support back then because 9/11 was fresh, and in a matter of months, I think not even a year, I think a year, all the attention overnight just focused on Iraq. And what you mentioned there, Jen, is that the people came out to the street immediately, right? They were, like you said, you were organizing demonstrations and protests even before the war started. People were out there in the streets. I believe it was registered as one of the largest anti-war protests, like in decades. But what you're saying, Jen, that in your experience in Vietnam, that didn't happen because most Americans didn't even know that they were soldiers in Vietnam. They were calling them advisors, and it wasn't like I think 2 or 3 years later, that's when the body bags started coming in and whatnot. That's when people started organizing protests. And soldiers back then, it's one of the things that Hollywood doesn't pick, that soldiers back then took a leading role in organizing demonstrations and protests. Out of that conflict, we have the Vietnam Veterans Against the War that came out of that conflict, started organizing people, started doing speaking tours and whatnot. That's one of the things that when they make films and depict the 60s and they pick protesting the wars and stuff, that's one of the things that they don't show. They don't show actual soldiers being involved, engaged, and coming back and organizing people to demo, right? In this generation, right, something similar happened with the Iraq War. As soon as they started coming in, soldiers started organizing, right? And this is where myself and Kevin fits in. Kevin, can you share some of the experience when you came back and found organizing?
I joined IVAW in 2012. And what's interesting, I actually joined through the arts. I was seeing YouTube videos. I was being told about this organization, Warrior Writers, by people in the writing program that I was in. And all along, I'd been interested in getting involved in anti-war activism, but I didn't take the leap. I was focused on school and other things at the time, but it was really the arts that sort of ushered me into activism. And then, interestingly enough, I did activism from like 2012 through 2017, 2018, and then kind of gravitated back toward the arts. And that's primarily where I am now. But still with that anti-war focus. And thinking about the intergenerational aspects of these workshops and the film, one of the things I think the post 9/11 generation of veterans learned from Vietnam generation is a lot of tactics for activism. IVAW actually recreated a lot of VVAW's protests. For example, like Winter Soldier testimonies that Jan and so many other Vietnam veterans were involved in, set up in when was it, 1971, Jan?
I think so.
So that's just one example. But then also, the poetry that was coming out of VVAW and Vietnam veterans who were, using poetry as a form of protest. That was inspiring to me also. And all this stuff kind of mixed together at some point for me. Activism, art, and yes, it's kept me nourished for the past decade, and gets me out of my little room here and into the world, and that's a good thing. So,
Talia, what is the artistic, avenue to protest? Because this film essentially is a protest film. That's what I took it. I took this as a protest film, protesting these wars, the concept of the narratives that were constantly bombarded with the different wars and whatnot, right? The title is not a war story. So, but what is that the artistic avenue has to do with, and the expression of art has to do with protesting wars and whatnot?
Well, that's a good question. There's a couple different ways to answer it, but what comes to mind is the fact that, the fact that the film exists in the form that it does, which is to say as a hybrid narrative, some real elements, real people, real conversations, but with a narrative structure and fictional characters who are informed by the real people who are in the film and so on. This kind of a hybrid, just the fact that it exists in that way is kind of a defiance of how films are, supposed to be made. And then you have, of course, the genre itself, the war movie, and what kind of story are you supposed to tell? You're supposed to do the rah-rah patriotism thing. And even for films that are kind of in some ways lauded for portraying the horrors of war, like Apocalypse Now and films of that sort, they do in a weird way also celebrate war because they're very sexy, they're very compelling. They're just dripping with these gorgeous images, and they really seduce you into, into the whole lore of it. So even though they may behave or sound as though they're anti-war, and functionally, I would say that they're not. And so this, I think, our film is in its own, modest way, I think, approximating an anti-war film in a way that I haven't seen before. And it's filling a necessary function in that way, because it is very hard to both capture it and also not show it. But I think it's also essential,
You know what? When you said that, because I saw this film from jump, I realized, I saw it as an anti-war film, very objectively. But I also had the privilege to talk to you before that, and you were telling me about it, and we discussed before that. But you mentioned other films that were also meant to be anti-war, like you mentioned Apocalypse Now. That was the intention. Platoon was the intention to be anti-war, to be a criticism of the Vietnam War. You have also Full Metal Jacket, and I've watched those movies when I was young. All right, and I didn't come out from it, as this is an anti-war movie. No, I came out of it more, more pumped up. I came out of it more pumped up, and but yours doesn't give that feeling. It was interesting because when we screened it here in San Antonio, we had also different generations in the audience, right? We had a couple of Vietnam veterans. We had veterans from so-called War on Terror, and we had young people, college people, and we had a young high school kid who was in RTC. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, he was in RTC. He also spoke as well, and we asked him what he took out of the film. And one of the things they took out of the film is that, a lot of the images that you portray, the narrative that you portray, is not something that he really sat down and thought about, because he's RTC, he's very active and everything like that. But that's not something that is in his school and stuff like that. That's something that is pushed on him, something that he's exposed to, and then he was exposed to it in the film. So it made him think, made him think a little bit more about another aspect of militarism. It's not all so sexy big guns and, uniform and all of that. It's another aspect to it as well.
Yeah. And also this is, this film should be the antidote to all that. It is by design. I mean, that's one of the problems with, a film like, American Sniper. It's just, you have the figure come home, but he's also a brooding, heroic, sort of, it glamorizes even that side of things. So it still isn't treating at all truthfully this experience in a way that is going to deter somebody like our fellow who is, considering the ROTC is to really think deeply about this, right? That was the challenge here, but that was also the commitment that we made at the outset. What movie are we making? We made the film that we set out to make. And all of these things that we're describing, which is why the title is so apt. But it has another meaning too, which comes from, Tim O'Brien, when you read the things they carried, and he comes to this conclusion that oftentimes to really arrive at the truth and really convey it, one has to go by way of fiction and metaphor and description and character. And I certainly have found this to be true. I think that was one of the exciting things about doing this collaboration and making the film in the way that we did, because I thought that it's not enough to just have these stories be told in a talking heads documentarian sort of way. One needs a narrative scope. One needs a structure where the story starts somewhere and arrives somewhere else over the course of 2 hours, so that you feel that scope, you feel the impact of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned American Sniper, for example. That the focus in that film was his PTSD, his demon, and whatnot, right? But everything, it was him. It was very soldier centric, and it was him, and the people he encountered in his deployment, which got the brunt of of the effect. They got, they're on the other side of the barrel. They got, they're at the front of, they're the ones whose homeland were laid to waste. They're invisible. They're treated as faceless zombies, for example. But in your film, right? Your film, and based on those conversations that we're having in the workshops, and based on the and that scene that you were with Will, and he's, we saw what are you thanking me for? You humanized the victims of this of these forever wars, this imperialist wars.
Yeah, that was very much an intention going into it, and that was the substance of the poem. Kevin and I had brainstormed poems for Isabel to have, and we talked about wanting to have represented this detainee experience. I'll let Kevin speak to that, but that was an intentional. We were finding ways, every way we could, to include that into the story. Maybe you can speak to that poem, Kevin.
The detainee. Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't personally have experiences with detainees like some of the veterans in our community who worked with them very directly, but I just had a couple incidents where, like, one night I was at the radar site. I was a mobile radar operator, sort of like air traffic control in Iraq in 2007. I was at Camp Taji, and I walked outside at night to use the porta-john, and I saw a line of detainees against a fence, and they were, I guess, waiting to be boarded on a plane and taken somewhere, who knows where. And that image, it was very brief, but it stuck with me. So I think, I don't know, maybe some of the poem comes from that. And also, it's certainly some of it's just, writing to spec, writing for Talia's character.
Yeah, which we had, aspects of the character even were conceived in collaboratively, and Paul Chaffin was a veteran who appears briefly in the film, but it was also working on the crew. The aspect of he helped inform this one aspect of her character being an MP. There were parts where we were trying to build her character in such a way where her experience would give us pathways to speak about certain experiences that could where we could deal with moral injury in ways that would invite it into the film. So if she had been an MP during a certain period of time, having served in Iraq, she would have had experiences of dealing with detainees, and that was the origin point for having a poem there that would give, allow the film to give expression to that experience and what that does, and not just to just point at the trauma that comes from that, but also to kind of acknowledge, as you were saying, Jovanni, about like humanizing those on, quote, the other side, whatever the heck that means, but the humanization of it, which is just, all these movies that we're talking about don't even bother to attempt, which is very damaging to the cultural conversation, to say the least.
These are just a couple of examples of the collaborative process. I was absolutely floored to see an actor reading one of my poems and saying, "Oh, I want to thank my friend Jan Berry for this poem," which I wasn't expecting that. On the other hand, that's what would be happening. Someone would be looking for something to read under the circumstances about suicide and say, "I want to thank the person who wrote the poem." Happens to be my good friend here, which I'm both a character and a unknown contributor. So that, again, that's only one example of the process in which taking all the various elements that we had available. This is not what you're going to see in a Hollywood movie.
Yeah, it's in a way, it's so anti-Hollywood that, I was like any filmmaker, concerned, well, what's going to happen to this when it finishes? Or you want it to be able to have a life and get out there into the world. But we had all agreed there was no reality wherein we would finish the film and then have some company come along and tell us that we had to change it. Right? We knew we were making something that was anti-Hollywood in all the ways that we've talked about, and they were either going to take it or leave it, and that was that. So yeah, I mean, when things happen the way that they happen, but the point is that we were not going to compromise on that, and that was the deal. Otherwise, the film wouldn't be what it is.
One of the exciting things about being able to participate in the viewing in Peekskill, New York, where a member of the crew has some relationship to the town in some way.
Mm-hmm. Nick Bowen, our sound mixer. Mm-hmm.
It was the oldest theater I probably have been in that still shows movies. And it was a small crowd, but they asked questions. So it was in that kind of a context in which this could be shown to all kinds of places and have a real conversation, as opposed to people go to a movie and then they get out and they walk out and then say whatever they want to say, but they're not saying it to each other.
Yeah. There was a screening recently conducted by a Vietnam veterans peer-to-peer group, and that Everett Cox was involved in. He's a Vietnam veteran who appears in our film, and they had quite a very long Q&A afterwards, and a very lively debate and discussion about the film. But one of the things that they ran up against was that they wanted to continue showing the film and get other organizations behind it. And evidently there's a little bit of pushback from organizations that are a little bit, I guess, pro-military, which is not surprising, I suppose.
We're pushing against. I grew up in the 1950s, and John Wayne was the epitome of the Hollywood soldier. The Boy Scouts was a training camp to go straight into the military. The American Legion in my town sponsored the Boy Scouts. They sponsored something called Boy State. They sponsored all kinds of other ways in which patriotism was indoctrinated into you. To have to unlearn that is very difficult to do. And then you bounce into, well, when you want to go back and have a conversation with those same people, they don't want to hear from you.
And it's interesting because with the Vietnam experience, right, it just became, they were resistant at the beginning, right? But then it came to a point, it just became conventional wisdom that it was a bad war. Then you started getting a lot of public demonstration, a very large demonstration. I just saw a video recently, Vietnam, anti-war rally in DC, where just a sea of people out there, and then Lincoln Memorial, so it became conventional wisdom, that it was a bad war, right? I mean, they even made an illness out of it called the Vietnam Syndrome. So the Vietnam Syndrome is a made up illness that, there's stated that Americans, because of the Vietnam experience, Americans, wouldn't support those types of wars again, they would be hesitant to send their young, boys and girls out to the military to fight wars. And if I'm not mistaken, Jen, right, and it took a while to get over that Vietnam syndrome, the
first Gulf War, President George Bush first or whatever, said we just kicked the Vietnam syndrome by, invading Iraq in 1990.
And right before that was the Panama invasion. But the point I'm trying to get to that throughout the 70s and early 80s, the military was not a popular institution among many Americans. And the film industry, during the Reagan era, made it popular again. You start pumping out these war films, Rambo, what's the other one?
Top Gun.
Top Gun, the Chuck Norris movies, and all these. I remember growing up, seeing the shows, all the popular shows at the time, all of them were Vietnam vet, Magnum PI, the A-Team, MacGyver, all these shows, all of them were Vietnam veterans, war veterans and whatnot. And, it's made popular again. Then you hit the 90s, like you said, the Gulf War just became a storm, became popular again. And, but that's something we haven't seen with this conflict, because this conflict in the Middle East we're in the 20th year. We want to commemorate 20 years of the Iraq War, but the wars haven't stopped yet. It just have been expanding. People seem to be numb to it now, and the popularity in the military hasn't decreased. It has increased. Do you sense that too, Jen?
Yeah, they'll come up with some way of romanticizing these wars. I mean, there's several movies out there about guys come back from Iraq, and the most recent one that's on cable TV is the guy with a dog. And even though he's all messed up and the dog is all messed up, they sort of, find a way of getting through all of this, and somehow or other you have a feeling that this was heroic. Why were they messed up is not really focused on in the movie.
Well, it's interesting with the Gulf War. That's where a lot of the support the troops rhetoric and culture that we have today comes from. When the purpose of fighting the war actually became, to a great extent, to support the troops, and we're still really living in that culture today. And I think like so much of our work has been to push back against that empty rhetoric. And something else, to go back to some of the films that you mentioned earlier, Jovanni, Apocalypse Now, supposedly anti-war films. I saw a lot of those movies before I joined the Army. As I said, and this is not a war story, I joined the military to get out of trouble, get my life back on track. And that was the primary purpose. The secondary purpose was that I was joining to go through the gauntlet, to become a man to a great extent. And what I think so important about this war story is that it removes that hyper-masculine element and effectively becomes an anti-war movie because of that, I think. Yeah.
Well, one of the things too, that when we screened it here, there was a Vietnam veteran, and he was a member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and I've collaborated with them and other, organized, in other events and stuff like that. One of the things he mentioned is that he talked about how he started organizing when he got back from Vietnam, and he said that this generation has a lot harder than when he came back and when he was organizing, when he was on the streets and stuff like that. And one of the reasons he mentioned is that back then, the media was more honest than they are today, and the fact that the media is in cahoots with the security state, makes it a lot harder, because now with the media becomes the propaganda arm of the security state, and the effect is to numb people, just like you mentioned about that the film about the dog, right? And there've been other films about, and TV shows and whatnot, where they have veterans in it, and there's always the sort of episode of PTSD and everything and all that. But like you say, they always find a way to, it becomes a mixture of a Superman and a charity case, something like that, or, something to feel sympathy towards, because we're all a poor person, right? But at the same time, it's the Superman as well. So it becomes like this weird junction here,
Yeah, and then it's also like Kevin was saying, there's also become, it's built now, this taboo where a movie like that just doesn't even go near. Well, why? What's the cause of this trauma? What's going on? What are we doing in the war? Like, none of all of that is implicitly, it's sort of become a taboo, right? One can't even ask the question, and so it becomes this social construct that to critique the war is to critique the veteran. And by doing that, they have shut people up. It's very effective.
Until the 1980s, with Reagan as president, there was something called the Fairness Doctrine,
Yes.
in which talk radio and talk television had to have somebody representing both sides, which allowed me as an anti-war vet to go on to all kinds of programs. And then in the 80s, we're all shut out. But we don't need you people any longer because we don't have to do that any longer. Except for in one instance when John Kerry was running for president, the people who essentially are Fox News did a hatchet job film about John Kerry, but they used some footage from Winter Soldier that included a guy who at the time was a professor at the University of Maryland, who was a Vietnam vet. And he threatened to sue them. And he went to their premiere, wherever the hell it was, and threatened to sue them. That film didn't really go anyplace, but that's what they were doing. And I happened to be in my own newsroom, and I'm seeing on CNN advertisements all day long about some guys who say they also were in similar units and John Kerry was lying. And not one mention on CNN about, what is this? What's this all about? Where did this come from? They just went along with the smear.
What do they call it? They call it Swift boat.
The Swift boat, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So now, and then we have, now we have social media. Now we have alternative media. It's supposed to democratize the media, give people more voice and whatnot, push back against the establishment and stuff like that. But when it comes to these foreign policies, most of them just fall in line. And not only that, there's a lot of funding involved. There's a lot of, partisan politics involved as well, depending on who's in power. It just becomes part of this alternative media, become part of mainstream media anyway, when it comes to it. But I wanted to ask you also, Talia, because you mentioned earlier, moral injury and there've been films before about PTSD, but moral injury is not something that comes out, and it's two different things. Moral injury and PTSD. PTSD is more physiological, and moral injury is more psychological. So can you explain? Can you explain different? Can you explain this? Why you took this angle?
Yeah, sure. Because initially, when I embarked on this a while ago now. 2015 was the very seeds of this, and my point of entry is trauma, because that's what I've just been dealing with for most of my life. Obviously not from war, but from my own other kinds of experiences from childhood and onward. And so my pulling on the strings of trauma and trying to contend with it and fathom it, is what led me down the road of this story. But the point for me when I discovered the distinction of moral injury, which is essentially that it's trauma that is caused specifically by feeling that one has crossed one's own moral boundaries. You've completely warped your moral compass and you've done something that goes against what you believe in. Now, yes, there's a psychological component, but there's an existential component to that. And it's something that very specifically points to, well, what did one do? It's not because when there's a focus only on the state of trauma, it's very easy for, let's say, another film or a story to say, well, someone witnessed something very violent, or endured something very violent, and it's easy to sympathize with that. But what I was interested in asking Americans when they watch this film is, can you empathize with and understand somebody who has this experience, not because of something that was done to them, but because of something that they did and took part in? That's the question that we have to ask ourselves as civilians, you see. And that's where it became a critical component to me. If that makes sense. I'm trying to capture a very complicated subject and be brief. So it's not easy to do.
I think what's interesting about moral injury is that it repoliticizes PTSD in a way. PTSD, really comes from the work that DVAW is doing. And Jan can probably say more about this. But, originally PTSD was, it was it came out of anti-war work. And, over the years, I think it's been depoliticized, where it's become more about the symptoms, which, rightfully so, you need to address those. But, like, again, the bigger questions not being asked, why were we in Iraq? Why were we in Vietnam? And moral injury brings those questions back into the conversation.
I got involved in this early on when someone had gone to a congressional committee in 1970 and said they should be aware of something that could be called the post-Vietnam syndrome. It was meant to be simply like a starting point. And this guy, whose name I'll remember in a moment, Robert Lifton, I contacted him and I said, well, I'm with a bunch of Vietnam vets. Would you sit down and meet with us? Which he did. And then he brought in a whole bunch of other people who were psychiatrists and psychologists who volunteered their time, who basically, and he'd been in the Air Force during the Korean War, but they basically said to us, they didn't know what to call this, but it was something that needed to be addressed. So we had what we called rap groups. So we could discuss what we were dealing with. I remember at the time thinking, wow. I never talk about that, but that's true. I never talk about that, but somebody else will say it. Wow. It's like, wow, somebody said it. And it grew in two different ways. One group of vets decided this is the area I want to work in and went and got whatever degrees they needed up to a PhD so they could work in this field. Another group decided they would write the legislation so that something could be done about it at the VA level. And both of these threads came together in 1979. This name was attached to the official diagnostic manual. And a bill came out of Congress in 1979 that would create these standalone vet centers outside of the hospital system to deal with PTSD. And as soon as the Reagan administration came in a couple of years later, they wanted to defund it. There was a huge battle. And in this case, some of the traditional veterans organizations stood up to, no, you can't just take this away. But it's been a constant fight over the years just to keep those services. And I think still to this day, most vets have no idea what a vet center is. But they can go to one. And what I discovered in going to the nearest one in Secaucus, New Jersey, is that's where the cops go who have PTSD. Because there's not going to be any record to getting back to anybody because that was the way the whole system was set up. It's not part of the hospital system, which one didn't want it, but number two, it has its own like standalone record keeping. In fact, it's so bizarre that when I applied a couple of years ago because of Agent Orange health problems, that I thought, well, I should add PTSD to my claim. The response in the VA was, prove why you have PTSD. I called up my counselor at the Secaucus Center and I said, can't you just email over to them whatever it is you have there? He says, no, we have to put it in the mail and mail it to them. That's how separate those two systems are. But what has happened over time is that PTSD went from being something that was kind of like, what are you talking about, to now everybody who was in the war legitimately has PTSD. Plus lots of other people. The whole concept of why it was in this diagnostic manual is that it included people who are rape victims, who are survivors of terrible car wrecks, who are survivors of fires, etc., all kinds of traumas. That's to a large degree been lost sight of in terms of where do all these people come together in the same place? Very rarely have that discussion. And only tentatively through the vet center process 3 years ago did we start having the conversation of men and women are in the same conversation. And I remember the woman counselor who got me first involved with the art group at Secaucus said to me, lots of men are raped in the military. Nobody's going to talk about that. Where does somebody go with that experience? So this is an area that still is shrouded in non-discussion more than anything else.
This film, your film has been reviewed. There's a review by the New York Times. It says, this is not a war story, nor does coming home means peace. This poignant drama, directed by and starring by Talia Lugacy, follows a traumatized Marine as she tries to connect with a group of fellow veterans. I can't read it in the paywall right now, but I wanted to ask you, what has been the reaction to this film? It's been a year now, right?
It's been like phenomenally positive. I mean, we had, I don't know. You never know. You do your goddamn best to make a thing, and then you put it out into the world and let it be. And you don't know how the world is going to respond. We had, an Independent Spirit Award nomination, which was pretty cool acknowledgement for the film. And it's on HBO Max, and, the reviews have been extremely positive, like unanimously, which is very cool. And I think it's a testament to just how rare of a film it is in some ways. I don't think it overlaps with a lot of other things. And I think when people encounter it, they realize that, like, this is really, I haven't seen this topic treated in this way before. And that's the kind of feedback that we get, which means that we did what we set out to do.
So where we go from here?
I mean, one of the things that it was sort of the point of making the film in this collaborative way was that ultimately it should be an invitation for civilians to be more curious and to ask more questions and to have an opinion, because one of the things that I found that was such a roadblock for me in the beginning was I felt like, well, I don't have a right. I don't have a right to have an opinion about it. I was very angry about the wars, but I don't have a right, I thought, because I wasn't there. And I was very encouraged, by Kevin, by Jan, by everybody else involved in the film who was a veteran to yes, you should take interest. You should have an opinion. And this collaboration was building this bridge between the civilian world and the veteran world, whatever that may mean, such that there is this clear communication and there are commonalities, like Jan was illustrating. I mean, there's so much trauma in our world. So much of it we have in common, much more than we realize. So in a way, look, the film stands as a kind of a testament to the fact that such collaborations can happen and should happen, and to encourage and invite audiences to experience it that way. You
said something key there. You said that that you were against the war, but you feel you have a right. And I believe that most people in principle and here in the United States are against these wars, but they feel that their voices, they feel they don't have a right. Same thing about it, like you said earlier, because it's personalized to this individual, it's tied to a person now, and it's deemed as, it's not polite to say something because, it's going to offend this person because, America people are very tied to their jobs, and given that we are, and the job becomes they're kind of their character now. And given that in the military, we have this, what's called volunteer military, but it's a contract military. People sign a contract and they go in, and so it becomes a job now. And, so it wasn't like a generation when you had what they call the lifers, where people that who were in the contract, but you have also people who were recruited, who were not recruited, but
drafted. Yeah.
Drafted, so it created like two different armies, so it was okay. It was okay to be vocal about it, about against it. But today it's kind of difficult. Like you said, that, you feel like you don't have a right, but you, by doing this film, you did voice your opposition to these wars.
Yeah. And there was a cool response we had in a screening in Los Angeles too. There was a young woman, civilian, who basically expressed that, like, she didn't know until seeing the film, or didn't really fully think about or appreciate that, like, the trauma that a veteran goes through is she recognizes it as her own experience. Okay, that's the beginning of having a conversation between these two worlds that, like, seem so separate. They're not as separate as as they may seem to be. And she's felt as if she was suddenly allowed, to ask questions and have conversations, and was, comforted by knowing that, like, there are others who have similar experiences, that there aren't so many lines between us all. Anyway, it was a good response.
Did you have any veterans? Do you have because I remember talking to you saying that you're trying to get veterans involved and watching this film. Did you have were you able to achieve to get more veterans to watch this film?
Oh, sure. We've had plenty of screenings organized with different places. I mean, again, it was part of the difficulty has been this ongoing COVID. I mean, the whole time the film has been available, it's so many of these screenings have happened remotely, but we have done it, and we've done it plenty.
Awesome. I think this is a good place to stop. Any last words from you? Jen?
This was one of the most exciting projects that I've participated in, and I've participated in a lot of exciting projects. Thank you, Talia.
Kevin?
I think This Is Not a War Story creates space for people with no military experience to ask questions that they otherwise wouldn't be allowed to ask, or to feel like they're allowed to ask. I think that's where the thank you for your service gesture comes from. I think so many of us veterans don't really like that gesture, because it's like the person is sort of pushing their perspective onto you, and they're sort of framing the conversation before you can have the conversation. But this film opens up space to have more difficult conversations than you could otherwise have. So it was a pleasure.
I just
Talia?
have to say how much I love these guys, Jan and Kevin, and how much I've just learned so damn much. In this whole process has been life affirming and life changing in some radical ways, and I have so much gratitude.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to hearing more about this film. Continue to watch if to see more reaction, more conversation open up around this war, and hopefully we'll see a day when we won't have to talk about this anymore. Yeah, we'll have to talk about this anymore, and we can live in peace, with the resource that we need, and not having to join this war machine just to join the gauntlet that Kevin was saying, and for economic security reasons. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for that fun. I appreciate you guys, coming on, and you was welcome here, and thank you for thinking of us, and yeah.
Thanks for having us, Jovanni. Thanks for
Jovanni.
Thank you.
Money is tight these days for everyone, especially in the lingering shadow of COVID. Penny pinching to make it through the month often doesn't give people the funds to contribute to a creator they support. So we consider it the highest honor that folks help us fund the podcast in any dollar amount they're able. Patreons is the main place to do that, and for supporters who can donate $10 a month or more, they will be listed right here as an honorary producer, like these fine folks. Fahim's Everyone Dream, James O'Barr, James Higgins, Eric Phillips, Paul Appel, Julie Dupree, Thomas Benson, Janet Hansen, Daniel Fleming, Michael Karen, Ren Jacob, Rick Coffey, Scott Spalding, Spooky Tooth, and the Status Quo podcast. However, if Patreon isn't your style, you can contribute directly through PayPal at paypal.me/Fortress on a Hill. Or please check out our store on Spreadshirt for some great Fortress merch. We're on Twitter and on Facebook.com/Fortress on a Hill. You can find our full collection of episodes at www.fortressonahill.com. Skepticism is one's best armor. Never forget it. We'll see you next time.
Come on, you good people, and listen to my song. I hope you'll pay attention. I will not